So what we're finding out is a lot of the if you will, the science that went into the interpretation of the logs in the past is changing. We're finding out that a lot of this, especially the gas component, can be unlocked with present completion technologies, right? If you tried to use technologies 15, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have worked. It's not like they didn't think it was there. They didn't know how to get it out, right? But now we've got these shale gas plays, and this is what's driving the industry at this point in our lives. Now finally, you get down to the matrix rock itself. We've established what the porosity is. We've taken out the shale component. So the last thing to look at is the matrix itself, right? What type of rock do we have? And now if you just do the math, we just have this little formula. We simplify things to some real simple formulas. 1 minus V shale minus effective porosity, that would be the shale volume. That's everything that's left, right? So either there's porosity, there's shale, or there is matrix. So now we've established, we've gotten to values to establish what these other things are, and now we can determine if we have enough data, a large set of different types of rock, we can actually calculate components within the formation. How much limestone's there? How much dolomite? How much sand? How much chert? Well, you can do all this. It's not that difficult. But this interpretation model is one of those things that you always want to have in your mind, that what am I trying to really get to? These are the things that I'm trying to get to, and that will never change. It'll always look just like that. So it's one of those things that once you get familiar with it, you don't have to worry about it changing on you. It's just what are you working with inside of that model right there. The other thing that you're going to think about, that's the one thing, there's really these two things that I really want to push real hard, and that's what does the environment look like that you're logging in, okay, inside the wellbore. And this is a picture that Schlumberger's had for years and years and years. I finally found, in fact I've got a copy of it, a chart book, and I had to get back to 1955 from Schlumberger, and they didn't actually have that picture. If you look at all the other ones, it always seems to be in the front of the chart book. So it's a real important picture, and it really hasn't changed very much, because this is what we're trying to do. This is the environment that we're logging in. You can see the borehole image, and then as you go away from the borehole, you have the different radiuses that show, when you drill with mud, for instance, what type of resistivities you're going to expect when we're working with resistivity logs as you get away from the wellbore. First of all, you have the flush zone moving out, then you have the zone of transition, or the annulus zone that we so-called talk about a lot, and finally the uninvaded zone. If you get out far enough away from the borehole, then whatever the drilling process was, it didn't affect things anymore. At that point, we're looking at that territory that we're actually trying to measure, for instance. But by knowing the values for these other rings, we're going to have an idea of how fluids are going to move, right? Because if it allowed drilling fluids to move through those zones, then probably it's going to allow hydrocarbons to move in the other direction, right? It's going to be the same process. But we can establish all of these rings, if you will, based on the readings that we have, and that's why a lot of the resistivity tools have multiple readings. They're all designed to try and duplicate the resistivities inside of those rings. And as time went on, we started out, of course, with single resistivities, then 2 resistivities, then 3, and then at this point in time, it's how many do you want? Look at an array induction and how many curves are involved. They're just stacking them up now. And what they're trying to do is to get to these values. So if you go back to the previous slide, you're going to be looking at that information to get to those numbers for the formation itself. And if you work with this slide, now I'm trying to establish what the resistivities might be and what they might mean to get to those values. These rings that we see, of course, they don't always look the same, right? Depends on the permeability and the formation. They might look like that all of a sudden. The diameters might tighten up. That's the reason for having the multiple resistivities. You still want to be able to track what the resistivities might be as the invasion changes. Okay? This becomes a pretty unique situation, and a lot of people have trouble with this. What's one situation where you would have tighter and tighter rings on your interpretation model? That would be something with extremely low permeability, right? Say it doesn't have any perm. Then the rings are going to be pulled back to the wellbore. There isn't very much invasion effect. Now, as permeability starts to increase gradually, these rings are going to grow, right? Interpretation rings. But what's going to happen, for instance, if you have an extremely high porous sand, and I've got a mud system that's working and building mud cake in reservoirs, what's going to happen to these rings again? They're going to collapse again, right? Because now I've got this mud system in the wellbore, and as soon as I establish or develop this mud cake, then it shuts off this process, okay? So this process that's going on is artificially shut off by the mud itself. So I've got rings that are expanding and shrinking in every zone as I'm logging up the well. But those two models are really, if you get these in your mind and realize all the time, this is all I'm really trying to get at, is to define these, you've pretty much won the battle. Now, you've seen where the information come from on the header from John, and that the resistivities are always listed on that header, so you can always get to that information. So you got that part of the model every time you run a log. And this is the typical dual induction response that you're going to see. This is the most common today, being transplanted, if you will, by the array induction, but it still kind of looks like this. You have multiple resistivities, and you're just reading those values directly from the log itself. This is generally called a fresh mud type log, but it has the multiple resistivities that we can make the comparisons for in the calculations that we're going to work on shortly. The next tool and it's been talked about, is the compensated neutron and the compensated density combination log. It's got two different types of porosity derived from electrically two different types of responses. It also has another curve, if you will, called a PE, which is a photoelectric curve, which is very, very close to a pure lithology type response. You didn't see this on logs for a long, long time. They knew about it when they designed the tool, but it wasn't taken advantage of until the last 20 years or so. And now you see it pretty much a commonplace curve, because it is it's almost a direct lithology type reading. By looking at the one curve, I'll pretty much give you a pretty good idea of what the lithology is, which is not bad for the type work that we do. And on this tool, you have on the left, you have the gamma ray and the caliper for any correlation work, any permeability, apparent perm type constraints you might have. And off to the right, you see that dotted curve. That's called the correction curve. Well, you have multiple detectors on the density, and that's the amount of correction that those detectors see compared to each other.